So basically, yes, this is the topic. Then what can you expect from this presentation? Essentially, first part will be about how European companies are disadvantaged, especially versus American companies in that context. Then we will be very practical. We will show you a model on how to define your marketing mix, because I think we really want to get across to you today on how you can effectively build a marketing mix which really produces growth for your company. And then obviously, once you have defined the marketing mix, the big question is, how do you define a strategy around this, and what are the areas of focus you want to have, especially with this growth concept in mind. Then we will talk a bit about the right environment for success, because I think given all the tracking technology and all the different automation tools we have, the right tooling setup, the right reporting setup, and this is essentially what we mean with environment, is absolutely crucial in order to be successful, especially for startups where you need to make decisions on what to focus your budget on and how you can squeeze out additional growth for your business. And then we will briefly talk about next steps in terms of what are really next points for you in order to implement this. So you see that the slides we have for you are really practical, and we hope that you go away from today's presentation with having additional points which help you to get better at your marketing mix and at the impact around your marketing campaigns. So this is the agenda. Then I start with the first part, why European companies are disadvantaged. Now you might wonder, why is that? In the end, the US and European marketing environments are probably pretty similar, but then obviously we have the first point, which is crucial to consider, which is around GDPR. And when GDPR was introduced first, I was essentially discussing it. What is ultimately the impact of GDPR? Is it really to protect the user, or will there be large disadvantages from a company growth perspective? And I think one of the initial effects, which we saw pretty strongly, is that many companies made the decision to turn to media houses they trust. So this was obviously a disadvantage for smaller European media companies. I can name as an example Criteo, where many advertisers actually turned away from. And this obviously went into the direction of Google and Facebook, which you see here pretty strongly, and which we're seeing that their growth was actually fueled by the GDPR regulation. And the other problematic thing here is obviously that Google and Facebook are owning their audiences, but it's problematic to actually get those audiences for us, so to get the consent once you have bought them from Google. And you might find yourself in a cycle where you need to buy over and over again the same audience from Google or Facebook. And this is also what I mean here with the second point in terms of audience growth slowed due to GDPR implementation. I mean, you know it yourself. It's actually creating additional hassle to always agree to the privacy regulation, and then especially at the beginning, many small companies found it actually very complicated to implement this, and this was adding to the complication, and ultimately increased further the dependency on Google and Facebook. Yeah, so this is the cycle which was created by GDPR, and which one could actually see as problematic. Please, Paula.
Thank you, Yannick. Great. So following into something really related to the previous topic you just mentioned is the increased dependency on a few big players, because there has been a closing of the ecosystem amongst a few players, and that creates or generates for the advertisers that they keep buying the same audience over and over again. If we just give a simple example, we're talking about Meta. The more that these companies start buying different channels of communications media, the harder it's gonna get to decentralize the way advertisers can buy their audience, and you end up buying simultaneously or several times or retargeting the same audience. So that dependency on these big few players is becoming, let's say, a big deal for advertisers at this point. Another point that is super important pointing out is the increasing prices that we're seeing across all type of media. So what we can see here is that on the paid search growth metric, which is the cost per click, in the past quarter, irrelevant of the retail product category, we keep seeing that the prices keep going up. And when we look at the offline market, we also see that overall the cost per GRP throughout all European markets is increasing tremendously. On one side, we would expect this to happen if the viewership is increasing, but on the other side, sometimes the viewers are decreasing, and or that's the case for TV, and nevertheless, prices are going up. That means for advertisers, it's getting more expensive to reach their audience through different media.
I think we saw this trend, especially now during the COVID pandemic, where there was even a higher dependency on online, which fueled to this additional in price increase ultimately. Then on the other hand, I have a lot of conversations, especially with startups, on which marketing tech to implement and what do I actually need in order to better understand the impact of my campaigns. And what you see here on this slide is that obviously the marketing tech landscape is tremendously difficult, and also difficult to understand, difficult to make the right decisions for the right player. At the same time, those conversations will be very time consuming and are most of the time then really also difficult to understand what is the impact after I have implemented this new tool. Is there really a value for the company and for the growth plan and for your budget achievement ultimately? So this is very complex, and one of the reasons why I think it's really complex, because once you look at European media houses, they actually don't have their own tools in order to understand what is the impact of your marketing campaigns or to deliver a better automation and targeting. So if you look here, for instance, on the right side, I put up a screenshot from Awin. And I would say that Awin is literally the media house, European media house, which is furthest advanced. But then at the same time, when you run with Awin, you understand that it's actually those tools also don't really help you to understand the impact, because they don't look cross-channel. They are complicated to implement. So there are serious disadvantages when you work with European media houses. And then on the other hand, if you look at the left side of the slide, you see the tooling landscape which Google has in place in order to support you. And obviously here it's very easy to target, it's very easy to understand, and this further increases the dependency and increases the shift towards those big American media houses. Yeah.
No, yeah. Another factor that it's really relevant and it's worth mentioning is that we're moving towards a streaming economy. So now the broadcast, the television landscape has been totally disturbed by the technology and the advance on it, especially when the COVID pandemic started as well. People started shifting their media consumption habits. So overall, we do see people consuming even more media, or at least video, but the way the media is being consumed is changing over time. So there's new players getting into the market, and that requires advertisers to introduce new media channels into their channel mix in order to reach the audience. Those that we can see clearly here in the chart are live TV is declining, but we keep seeing that the viewers are shifting towards broadcast video on demand or subscription video on demand, or even the recordings of the same broadcasters. So we've seen that over time in the graph below, that players such as Netflix, Disney, Amazon Prime, those are the ones gaining the audience and the viewership over time. And following on that thought, we also see that the advertisers' media strategies are not really reflecting those changes in the media consumption. So until now, most of the media plans that advertisers create are sticking to the traditional media that they have always bought, because that's what they know how to track, how to measure, or at least even if they cannot measure them 100%, they are used to that. So they trust that type of media. However, in 3 years, the forecast is that linear TV will draw, as we previously mentioned, but other marketing channels are going to raise and give more reach, and they're going to have more time of consumption from the audience. So that means that overall, the advertisers are not taking that into consideration, but they should start doing it faster in Europe. In the US, advertisers are moving faster. There's more technology for tracking, and they're more advanced in the media planning. So now, just to sum up, we made the following points before. We spoke about GDPRs. We explained why this is causing a focus on the main players, and it's slowing the proprietary audience growth. We also spoke about the closed ecosystem that are leading to centralization of advertisers into the same players. We also mentioned the increase on prices. So the CPCs have been raising, and that lastly diminishes the potential of positive returns for the companies. Furthermore, we spoke about the different European media sales houses startup that, due to the lack of or the limited market capabilities, they're always moving towards the same media sales houses, and there is less trust on certain media sales houses. And lastly, we spoke about the media consumptions and how advertisers need to start diversifying this in order to reach other audience and to make sure they're keeping up with the changes of the media consumption habits.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what Paula is summarizing here is ultimately points which are reinforcing each other and creating, especially for startups with limited capabilities in terms of their team size and also of their specialization, creating huge barriers for growth ultimately. And but then at the same time, the question is obviously always how to start. And when you think of your marketing mix, I always see this very broad. So essentially, when you consider your marketing mix, you need to think about the entire environment where you can find your users. And for that reason, first of all, telling you that the environment is very complicated, and actually engaging your audiences in this crowded marketplace is ever more challenging because our audiences are bombarded with media at every step and at various different devices, and therefore really a systematic approach, and I call it here programmatic implementation. So programmatic implementation is not really just considering display. I mean, obviously in the display environment, this term is used a lot, but what I mean by programmatic implementation is ultimately to be sorry, that was a call. What I mean by programmatic implementation is ultimately to be very systematic and to be very data-driven, to be automated with your targeting in order to reach the right audience at the right moment with the right message. So, so this is the first point. Then a model which I always like to use in order to really think strategic about my media mix is the Peso model, which you see here on this slide. And this refers back to what I told you at the beginning of this section. Don't only think about marketing as focused on paid media or on certain campaigns you are running. But marketing is really about tackling the entire online environment. And therefore, I like the Peso model because it shows the different areas you need to think of. So first, we have owned media, essentially, which are your websites, your apps, also your customer data. Then we have shared, which is ultimately referring to social channels, which are more shared, where you actually tackle audiences which are following you. Then you have earned, and earned is actually very important because earned is something you target, or a media you target because you have good content, you have very solid content. So I write here PR or partnerships and PR posts which you earn because you have content which is attractive, because you have products which are attractive and which are writing about you. So earned is very important and should not be forgotten. And then obviously you have paid, and paid is about all the paid media which we were talking before about. So for instance, SER, display, affiliation, out of home, or even TV. And the other thing which you see on this model is that we are talking here about an inner audience and we are talking about an outer audience. And this is also crucial because obviously the inner audience knows your brand already. So it's much more likely to convert. And the outer audience is an audience which don't know your brand. You can obviously optimize those channels in order to achieve a higher conversion rate. But then at the same time, it tells you something. Maybe you want to focus, especially at the beginning for your startup, much more on owned, probably on earned, in order to get audiences which are highly valuable to your brand. And then at the same time, it also tells you something on how to treat those different channels. Because if we are talking about outer audience and you are buying this audience, you need to make sure that obviously you have technology in place which is making sure that you get the consent from those users and are able to retarget them via email marketing campaigns, for instance. Yeah, so this is the Peso model, and I like to use this model always to think about the marketing mix which I put in place in order to have the right share and also the right focus. And then obviously you have we have this slide which shows you the classical media landscape, and I see many companies who either focus on acquisition marketing or on brand marketing, but I think it's important to have the right mix between audience acquisition, which we have here on the one side, where usually you are running to a CPA, revenue share, or probably a pay per click model. And then you should obviously not forget your other media areas. Yeah, Paula, do you want to explain the rest of it?
Yeah, perfect. So, on the partnership or media partnership sides, we have the traditional media that we know as offline. So we have the out-of-home, TV, print, PR, and so on. Until now, people have always think linear when they were doing the planning of their campaign. So whether they were doing only TV or only radio, and they were not really looking at the whole picture and trying to plan holistically. But in the next section, what we're going to try to show you is how to plan, like with the Peso model, pretty much how to define your strategy to make a campaign successful. So I will say be customer centric. That is where you should start. Always define your audience. Don't think about your products as a company. Think first about the customer. Once you have defined that, then you can position in their perspective and try to gain them. So firstly, gain customers' insights. We have learned that there's different places we can get this information, but mostly we always focus on the traditional way. So we get the demographics, we do surveys, we try the super traditional ways, but we're not doing let's say social listening. We're not trying to see what are they talking about in the forum, and understand what they don't say directly to you, but they're talking about you. That is super important. Once you have gained these customer insights, try to build a customer mapping. Try to map their journey as well through the experience. With those insights, build segments and try to generate personas. This is going to be super interesting because at the end of the day, you may have a product, or startups have a product, but they're going to be used differently depending on the persona. So try to cluster the customers based on their usage, on motivations, what are the inspirations, and try to identify the purchase points. Based on that, and also looking at their media consumption habits, find the best content that you can give them. So it's going back to what Yannic was saying. Try to find exactly the content that is relevant for the different personas that you have selected, and use the perfect media or the most efficient media for that type of customer. So if you're focusing in someone that is really tech savvy and they're really active in social media, then probably try to build a story behind the product that you want to advertise towards them, and use the channels that they're more likely to use, but use different messages throughout the journey. First do the awareness, then do the traditional part, go into consideration, and try to make them to conversion. So that's the way I would suggest. Start with customer centric, and then build your communication towards the customers. And always think holistically. So this is reiterating a point we made before. Don't stay only with the traditional media mix, but try to innovate. Look at how the customers' media consumption habits are changing and adapt towards them. So start trying some VOD. Try to do addressable TV. We know that 55% of the households of the UK have smart TVs. So why not doing addressable TV? Why sticking to the traditional chatter ad break where we have tons of brands saying pretty much the same? Another way is probably doing programmatic out of home. There is nowadays different companies that are helping you buy out of home in a programmatic way, or even try to explore non-commercial space. So what we were saying, there is a lot of VOD or different streaming platforms that probably do not offer like ad breaks or paid media or placements. But what if you try to do a partnership? So it's going back into the partnership. Don't forget that. Maybe doing a product placement could help there. Important is as well to plan the media strategy from the beginning. It should be holistically planned, meaning do not separate and work in silos. What is my forecast revenue or reach of the digital channels versus the offline channels? Try to put them together. Nowadays, there is also companies that are trying to offer softwares where you can plan as a whole, so you can see what is the potential of having all these channels cross media, and what could they bring to your company as a one. And moving into the content, as we mentioned before, try to find relevant and useful content for the different stages of the funnel of your client. do not keep saying or change the message according to their needs to make sure that the conversion and the whole experience for the client at the end is relevant and is good. Try to personalize it. So if you find that it's certain persona that you have spotted before, really listen to one type of podcast, then try get a message in place and try to approach them in a personalized way via podcast. So that is part of the recommendation that I will say about the how to put together your strategy. Now, about
yeah, exactly, Paula. I think what Paula is essentially telling you here is to avoid single focus, because what we saw with many companies is that some are really dependent on one marketing strategy or one marketing channel, and obviously this is highly dangerous, and you always need to have this holistic approach. And then obviously the challenge is always to make the holistic approach work. And when we come back to the Peso model, so what I write here is get your own media optimized first. I think this is absolutely crucial, because the owned media, so your own web properties, your own websites, your apps, are essentially where you focus all your audiences on, you are buying. And when you have their low conversion rates or landing pages which are not working, which are not personalized, then obviously you are spending money quite ineffectively, and therefore it's important to have first a focus here. Then don't underestimate getting the right tooling and data set up in place, and I will talk about this in the next section. But ultimately this is absolutely crucial. So understanding what is actually the performance of your campaigns, and how to best target also your campaigns in a programmatic way again. So this is absolutely crucial. Then at the same time, I would avoid any larger media buy, I would add here, where you don't understand the impact. Because you have such a big selection of different campaigns you can run, of different media you can target, that it's always obviously safer to target media where you understand the impact. And because otherwise it's very risky. If you don't know what the impact is on your KPIs, then you are highly likely that also you will spend your budget ineffectively and you will actually lose money. So especially for startups, I think this is always an issue. And then really don't forget about earned and shared, especially the earned part. I'm seeing many companies who ask me, why should I have a PR strategy? What is really the value of a PR strategy? Now I'm speaking against my own advice, because obviously for a PR strategy, sometimes it's difficult to measure the impact and to understand what the impact on our KPIs is. But then at the same time, you need to consider that PR, especially if it is free, is usually not so expensive. So from this perspective, you can make assumptions. How many people can I reach if I have an article in a newspaper XYZ, and based on this, you can see that even if you employ one additional person to manage this, it could actually make sense from a cost perspective. So therefore, never forget about this, and to me, it's very important, and shared in a similar way. Because if you have a lot of followers on Facebook, make sure that you keep them updated with your messages, and I think this is definitely of high value. So now let's talk a bit about the right environment for success. And as I told you, this is a part which you should not underestimate. I think the first comment which I will make here is you are actually in the data business. So no matter which product you are selling, getting your audiences right, understanding your audiences, and also building your own audiences by collecting their consent on your website, saving them in an audience database, and making this audience data again available to your marketing campaigns or to your email marketing strategy is absolutely crucial, and it's actually part of your competitive advantage. So basically, if you are in the B2C sector, it's highly crucial that you understand this as part of your strategy and as part of your business. So this is the first point. Then, how do I actually get this environment set up right? What you see here on this slide is essentially 3 areas. So the first one is about automation. It's ultimately about tooling. So do I have the right tooling in order to effectively manage my campaigns? And some of this tooling is free, especially if we are talking about Google. But then it's a matter of setting those tools up to achieve the right thing. So for instance, if we are talking about SER, it's about employing the right bidding or targeting logic in Google Ads, which is absolutely crucial and which many companies actually neglect and don't do right. Then the second pillar is about reporting and attribution. Understanding how you report your data and where you get your data from, and then understanding the attribution model and getting this attribution model right is absolutely crucial in order to understand your impact. And many people come to me and tell me about data-driven attribution models and or other complicated things in order to understand their campaigns. And sometimes, I think the simplest application can already get you 80% of the understanding. And sometimes it's really about this 80%. So what I mean by this is potentially have Google Analytics in place, employ a simple last click or last touch attribution model, and then use this data for your understanding. And in a similar way, obviously this could then also work for TV campaigns or for even PR campaigns, applying simple measures in order to potentially understand or get a sense of the impact. And the last pillar, which you see here on the slide, is first-party data. And as I told you on the previous slide, first-party data is absolutely crucial to get this right. What I write here is CRM tooling, ESP tooling. ESP is about email service provider. So having there a good tooling set up in place, which also allows you to capitalize on this data and to make it accessible for your marketing channels is again absolutely crucial in order to act on this data and really use this data as your competitive advantage. And then here this is a bit more playful, this slide, but ultimately it tries to visualize that all those different areas which you are working on is ultimately creating a system which is increasing your efficiency. So if we start at the bottom of this stairway, you see here performance data. So understanding the performance of your campaigns and having this data in a cleaned up form, probably in a last click attribution model, already helps you to better target and direct your campaigns. Then audience data is the next pillar. Do I upload my audience data, for instance, into Google Ads, into Facebook in order to make this targeted? Do I use this data for email targeting? Then the next point is, again, tech and tooling setup. We talked about this essentially for targeting and automation. Then obviously combining all of this with the right messaging, commercial messaging, with the right offers, which you need to make available to your campaigns, which also allow for personalization, which is key here. And finally, landing pages and conversion rate optimization. So do I have personalized landing pages? And sometimes personalization doesn't really refer to audience personalization, but refers more towards, do I have a landing page which is connected to the message which I have in the ad? So it could be as simple as this, to have the same message on the landing page as I had in the ad, which in turn increases your conversion rate. And therefore, all these different areas, and I could name many more, form a system which then leads obviously to a much better ROI. And suddenly you feel an ROI target which you had before is probably much easier to achieve. Yeah, exactly. So Paula, next steps.
Next steps. What do we do now? We know the strategy, we know the tooling we need. How do we put that in place? So firstly, we recommend identify your target audience. That is your starting point. Once you have done that, review what you have planned already. What's your marketing mix at the moment? How are you implemented it? Is this efficient or not? And feel free to challenge it. Also, think about the KPIs you have set up. What is the customer attraction you're having, the channel share, the audience growth. Feel always free to challenge yourself based on new discoveries that you have done. The fact that you have been buying a type of media for a certain price in the past doesn't mean that it was right. So feel free to challenge. Things are changing continuously, and if we don't challenge what we're doing, we're gonna keep being inefficient in the long term. Also, define a roadmap, cross-channel, cross-audience. This is really important, holistically. And also look at your products and the data that you have to improve. Make sure that you're taking all that input from your data and use it to adapt and optimize your channels. The communication that you're using and the channels are going to be crucial for that ROI that Yannic was mentioning. And lastly, but not least, ensure to have a matching team setup. In matching team setup, there's two types of teams we should be referring off. So number one, do you have the setup for the tooling side? But also remember, you need to have the people resource there. It's the team that you're building, the co-workers that you're having, are they good enough with the tool? Do they know how to find the right structure? And make sure that the full setup is set up pretty much for success and for long-term ROI.
Yeah, exactly. I think on that point, it's crucial to understand marketing not only as campaign managers, but also on the data science side, on the BI side, and similarly on the developer side, in order to build the right landing pages. So it's really a bit a cross-functional exercise. Perfect. So thank you very much, and it was a big pleasure. And now I think, Johanna, you have a couple of questions, right?
You're muted. Sorry.
Many questions. First of all, thank you very much for this highly interesting insight into the world and ecosystem of marketing, and how companies can benefit from these developments if they choose the right mix. As you said, they will have the chance to stand out of the competitors, and yeah, will have their chance to compete with them. Yeah, now let's get into the questions. If one of you has got some.
I would have one.
Yeah.
You mentioned that that basically European media houses don't have the necessary tools and actually falling more and more back and are not used by companies as much. But you also said that marketing channels are getting more and more diversified. Could that be a chance for European players to pick up? Because it's probably hard to beat Google and Meta on the established channels, but to then use potentially new channels and also help to develop them, or is that highly unrealistic because the others have such a big high market reach already.
I think, Simon, sometimes it's about understanding this if you are a European media house, so understanding the challenges which you have and building a strategy around this, because look at Awin. Essentially, Awin is trying to build their own tooling landscape. At the same time, I would say they could also use Google tools in order to actually attribute better. So they could integrate and borrow much more from the Google landscape. Probably they don't want this, but I think it's important, especially on the corporate strategy, to realize that you have a challenge there and to build around this, because ultimately there is no harm of showing the impact of your campaigns and actually allowing advertisers to target the media right, because then you have satisfied advertisers and make sense for your business as well.
So you mean it's more a matter of mindset than of actually capability?
To a certain extent, I think obviously Google has a lot of engineers on hand in order to do this, but then at the same time, I think it's sometimes really strategy and mindset. So, for instance, if I look at the TV stations, there are small agencies who are doing the tracking and the attribution much better than the big TV stations. So why is that? Why can the 7-One Media, for instance, not build attribution systems which actually make it much easier for the customer to understand?
Yeah.
What do you think? How can the startups meet the GDPR requirements in an efficient way, because they don't have so high capabilities or so many high capabilities?
Yeah, so basically, I think for GDPR, nowadays is actually quite easy because there are many agencies on the market who are helping you to manage consents.
Mm-hmm.
And here again is about the startup getting the understanding that there are actually agencies out there who can help me and who can implement this. And this is why I had this one slide in terms of you are actually in the data business. I think each business needs to understand this is core and central to my strategy, and I need to think even on the CEO level on how I manage my consent data. And then once you have internalized this, then it's actually not so difficult.
Makes sense.
So,
cool.
One last question from my side.
Please,
so Paula mentioned that smart TVs is a good way also for startups to buy media, TV media. So is it easier to buy a smart TV media than normal broadcasting TV media? Is it cheaper and easier?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let's say, for example, in Germany, it's possible to buy addressable or connected TV addressable media through, for example, if you go to a sales house, you can decide, let's say we go to 7-One Media, you can decide whether you buy linear TV and you just say the day part you want to be in by the normal channel. By doing that, you're targeting, let's say, everybody that is watching that. They can give you an average who's watching that, but it's not that accurate. So you're buying at the end, if you convert that on a CPM, because there will be a lot of people watching it, it turns out to be relatively cheap, let's call it that way. But if you go to 7-One Media again, select the same channels, let's say, and say, I want to buy this specific audience. It's so targeted that they know which households have the smart TV and where can they target, and they will only be broadcasting your media in that ad break. So the normal ad break, let's say it has an advertisement A, but because that, the whole country is seeing that. but because you're buying addressable TV, only your household, that is the one that you want to approach, is going to be watching that. Only certain people. So from a money perspective, you may be paying less for the overall campaign price. Let's say it's probably you're putting 30% of the total budget. However, you're reaching much less people. So your CPM is going to be more expensive. It's just you're going directly targeting to the people that you want to have. So your reach, overall reach, is lower, but it's really addressed. And from a technical side, it is as simple as buying normal TV. The only thing probably will be you will need to do different negotiations, but it is simple to buy it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
It's something that is not that well known in Germany yet, but in many other countries, they've been doing it for longer time.
Okay.
And what are the ratios, or what are typical amounts of money that you have to pay for that, for both?
Oof. Oh, that's a good question. It depends on the size of the campaign. Let's put it on, I guess that's really hard to say, but I will put an example of a CPM, which is what would it cost you to buy your audience. Let's say if you're buying normal linear TV audience, you could be paying, depending on your target group, but it could be something about €4 a CPM, 4,000 people. When you're buying addressable, we're talking about €22. So the difference is much, much higher, but you're getting into the right people that you're really targeting, that segment or persona you have selected. I would say sometimes if you're a startup and you're lacking the big budgets, then probably I will rather move before into a different type of channel. Like I will go more with digital, just trial and error. You get right away, you get results, you can scale up. Once you have a bigger budget and you want to start increasing your reach, then I will suggest moving forward with this type of media. But you will require a bit more of a budget to see a proper impact.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And again, if you are a startup with a limited budget, would you then say as well, look at the marketing mix in a holistic way, or just pick out one or two things which would make the most sense depending on your product?
I think always, regardless what your size is and what your budget is, always think, as we said, customer centric. What is the media they're consuming? The fact that someone is actually consuming a lot of TV doesn't mean you have to go in that media. It's not exclusively, they just complement each other. So at the beginning, for the planning phase, I will say do it holistically. Think about the roadmap, all of it. It doesn't mean you have to execute it all at once. Go slowly and try to scale it up and see what works, optimize it, and then you can increase further. But the thinking should be always holistical and cross-channel.
Great.
Maybe Yannic, you have something else to complement on that one.
I mean, as we told you in the slides, ultimately it's about getting basics right in terms of your own channels and your own media, so your websites and so on, and then making it simple. Because if you don't understand what a Facebook campaign has as an impact, then I would not worry about it so much. So focus on the things which you understand, and never forget audience data. So build your audience up, because ultimately the audience is an asset for you, and where you can generate repeat rates with, which are obviously then a lot cheaper for you. So therefore, I think it's really having the right focus there.
Great. Final question from my side. Drawing a little bit of a more big picture, and to look into the crystal ball. What do you think until, for example, 2040? We talked already about Google. Do you think there will be on the market, there will be more consolidations and mergers, for example, between Google and Baidu or similar players, or the other direction into holistically disruption?
Yeah, it's a bit worrisome that actually big media houses like or Google and Facebook are centralizing so much. Then at the same time, it was quite promising that TikTok grew so strongly, also in European markets and US markets. Obviously, there are also concerns about psychological concerns about TikTok. So, but I would hope that actually we see a lot more disruption. And one of the biggest challenges of European media houses, and I can only always refer to Awin, is that they don't think enough about the tools they need to build up in order to completely understand their campaigns and to target their campaigns right. And then it's not only about Awin, but if Awin has a certain technology, it's actually not handing this technology over to other companies in the larger corporate setup of Awin. So so this is a bit of a problem. And or think of what Paula told you in terms of programmatic TV. Programmatic TV in the US is much more established. In Europe, it's still not established, and it's actually sometimes more expensive, difficult to get, and I think there needs to be much more investment into this.
Great. I think we're done. We have answered all the questions.
Perfect. Fantastic. It was a big pleasure.
It was a big pleasure. Thank you very much, Yannic and Paula, to have you here, and for this really interesting and great presentation. I think we learned a lot.
We did.
I hope so.
Fantastic. Very good.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will have our next Open Masterclass on May 5th at 6:30 p.m., same time as today. Then with our partner, ennea partner Jan-Frederik Valentin and Karen Löhner from New Travel League. We are looking forward to it and have you all here at the same time. The presentation or the Open Masterclass then will be under the topic Travel Investment and M&A, how to build substantial future value in a market dominated by oligopolies, state players, and the GAFA. We are already very excited and looking forward to it. Until then, I wish you a good time. I wish you a good evening. And yeah, see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank
See you
you.
next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thanks.